Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your buddy Chewie. I'm back tonight with my good brother and friend, Mr. Matthew Pippinger. How are you, sir?
Doing
406.
great, sir. Doing great. Glad to be back in front of the 406 audience. I'm really happy that both of you were here to join us, and we hope you enjoyed this podcast.
You and you, yes. So it's been a while since the two of us have gotten together. The last discussion that we had was about 80s hair metal, which was just a tremendous conversation. And I got a lot of good feedback about it, and I got a lot of I heard quite a few folks that had not heard of some of the songs that we talked about, which I thought was cool. So
Nice.
so I thought that was kind of
thought it
cool.
would be an educational piece as well.
Right. Right, exactly.
Come here to learn is what you do on
Right.
406.
So how are things? Things are good in life for you, I hope.
Yeah, everything's good. Still just life as life is these days, working from home all the time. My oldest is getting ready to start kindergarten here, so we're trying to figure out how a kid starts kindergarten and does it in this day and age. So there's all kinds of interesting challenges going on. So
what does that look like in Indiana? Have they decided what that looks like yet?
I think it really depends on the school and how they want to handle it. But no, I mean, it's sort of spread across the board. It's going to be one of those things where they kind of just throw the kids into the environment and see what happens. But they're going to be wearing masks and stuff like that, which I think is going to be a real interesting, exhibition of 5-year-olds wearing masks in school and trying to get them to do that. And at the same time, they're going to classes and they're carrying bags and pencils and books and all that kind of stuff. It's a pretty significant upgrade from what she's been doing so far. So that on top of the pandemic is just really, really bizarre, which she wouldn't know any different, right? She's never done it before. So
I suppose if there's any silver lining, it's the fact that these kids really don't know any better, right? So it's like, it's crazy weird for us, but maybe for them it'll just be kind of normal. So
it'll be an interesting story that they can tell, and their kids someday when they have the same experience, hopefully not the same, but a similar one.
Yeah. So but before we get started, what's your drink of choice this evening, sir?
So I was hoping you would ask. My drink of choice is actually, so it's still my typical gin, straight up gin with a couple blue cheese stuffed olives. But I'm drinking this. It's called, I actually brought the bottle because I've never seen it before, and this is not a name that it's easy for me to remember, but it's called Drum Shanbo. And it's a gunpowder Irish gin. I'll show the fans out here.
Wow.
It's really, really good. It's just a couple ticks above Hendrick's gin in terms of price. So I thought, well, I'll upgrade a little bit and see what a fancier gin tastes like. And it's really, really tasty. For
awesome.
My palate, I really enjoy it. What about you?
Outstanding. Tonight is Tom's Foolery bourbon. Tom's Foolery is actually a local distillery in Chagrin Falls, Ohio.
Oh, nice.
So I started drinking it a couple of years ago. When I go to my Pennsylvania Kill the Can meet every year, I like to take a bottle of something local with me. And a couple of years ago, I brought that, and it was the first time I had tried it, and I really kind of enjoyed it. So it's and I get to support local on top of having a good drink. So
very awesome, very very noble of you.
Yeah. So okay, so let's get into it here. We do have a topic this evening. I won't call it a top 5 or a top 10, but it is so we were chatting after our last show. We were saying, okay, well, what's the next topic? And so we kind of brainstormed about a couple things. We got hundreds of things that we want to talk about over the years. But tonight we're gonna just kind of a random. This is movies that could not be made today, and it could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because of the topic. It could be because they're no longer relevant. It could be because the filmmaker doesn't have the balls to make the film today. What have you. So I don't know that we're necessarily ranking these films, but these are I've got a list of 5 or 6. That I just don't think you could see these films made today. And and we were talking before we started recording, maybe you could kind of twist it a little bit and it might still be a relevant film, but it certainly would not be the product that you have on the screen that
Right.
we have, for the most part, come to know and love. So, you know what? I will let you, if you would like, I'll let you start and kick us off this evening.
Yeah. So, and again, yeah, to reiterate, it's not really a top five. I'm not going to rank these in any. Well, that's not true. I'm probably going to rank these in sort of an order. I'm going to start with the ones that I have five on my list, and I think three of these five are ones that if they were cut up a little bit differently, may still make it to screen. You just might have to substitute jokes, and it may not be quite as funny or quite as reputable. But there are definitely two on this list that I think would be extremely difficult to have made, especially the way that they were. And we'll get to those. But I mean, the first one that came to mind, I think, is probably one of the most iconic comedies of all time that definitely crosses pretty much every boundary of racism and probably sexism as well. And that would be Blazing Saddles. I don't know anybody who would engage in a conversation like this and not bring that movie up, which was, it was a really funny movie. I remember watching it when I was younger. And to be fair, a disclaimer, I have not seen any of the movies on my list in a long time. I've seen bits and pieces, and I actually rewatched all of the trailers right before we started recording, just to kind of give me a refresh. But I haven't seen Blazing Saddles in a while. And obviously there is some very choice language and some themes in there. Made, and oh gosh, I should have looked this up and I don't remember. I think it was made in the late 70s, right?
Let's take a look. I was going to say early 80s, but let's,
maybe it was like 3-ish or something like that. But I think the thing about all of these movies is that they were all made at a time where, this kind of content was more widely acceptable. Right. Yeah. So it's not a matter of, they couldn't get made today. That doesn't make them bad movies. It just means that they're a product of a time where those things and those sensitivities weren't brought to, the forefront by a lot of people. So, they kind of are what they are. They don't age well in some respects, certainly. But, that's kind of the product of their generation. But that's my first one, Blazing Saddles.
All right. Yeah. No. And so I did just look it up. Blazing Saddles actually came out in 1974, which is actually much earlier than I thought it was.
Yeah.
But you're right. So this was one of the ones on my list as well. Again, I don't know how you could, the entire kind of premise of that movie is satire and parody. And it's dealing with race, and it's dealing with sexism, and it's dealing with all sorts of stuff that, to your point, really, really didn't age well at all, right? And it's funny, I was, the last episode, I was talking about, some other similar topics that haven't aged well, right? So the Cleveland Indians mascot, Chief Wahoo, and those kind of things, right? So
it was really interesting.
Yeah. So Blazing Saddles. It's funny. I saw a meme just the other day, and it said, "Blazing Saddles will be being shown on TBS. The clean version. It'll air from 8 o'clock to 8:07." The point being,
right.
The point being, they would have to cut out so much of the movie. There would be about 7 minutes left. So.
Right. It's like watching Goodfellas on TBS and thinking you're watching a documentary on Morse code.
Right. That's exactly right. So, okay. So this one, I think, my next one, I think, is going to fall into the category of you would have to really recut it to make it a viable movie. This is a movie that Pip and I have talked about. Hey, if you're going to remake a movie, this one might actually be a good one to remake. Candidly, I'm glad that they haven't, because this particular movie holds a special place in my heart, and it's Police Academy.
Yeah, knew it.
The original, especially the original Police Academy. There are, let's see, and again, it's been a while since I've watched it. one thing that's interesting, I don't remember what that movie is rated. It's got to be rated
It's
R,
R.
right?
It's for
It's
sure
got to
rated
be.
R because when I was younger, I didn't see the first Police Academy for a long time. The first one, I believe, first one I'm sure of was rated R. The second one, I believe, was PG-13. And it wasn't until the third one where they started making them all PG. And that's the first, I think the third one's the first one I saw, maybe the second one, because
Okay.
I lived in a house that was very strict with some of those rules. So I couldn't watch Police Academy until many, many years later. So,
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So the, and I guess where I was going with that was, I'm actually glad it was rated R, because where I was going with that is, if you go back and you look at a lot of movies from our youth, and you look at them now with the eyes of a parent, I'm actually kind of shocked at what got into some of the movies that were PG or PG-13 movies. Police Academy, especially, I would have been shocked if it wasn't rated R. Tons of nudity, tons of really, really
right.
bad language. And there's a slew of racism in there, a slew of sexism in there, a slew of homophobia. Again, all of that being said, is a really hilarious movie, and you kind of feel bad, again, looking at it through the 2020 lens. You feel bad at laughing at some of that stuff, but yeah, again, you might be able to recut it and change it to today, but I don't know that it would be half as good as it was. I don't know that the jokes would land the way they did.
Right. I agree with that. I think that I have a certain reverence to that movie just because I saw it when I was younger, and I saw it at a time where, those kind of jokes made me laugh. And I realized as an adult, if I saw that movie for the first time today, there would certainly be things that I would laugh at, but I'd be like, oh man, that's pretty
Yeah.
cringeworthy. But I would agree that it holds a special inappropriate place in my heart where all the sort of naughty humor goes. And I think the interesting thing about this list, and I don't want to give too much away, and I'm going to guess it's pretty similar to yours. All these movies are comedies for me, and there's something to be said about the whole what joke is too far, right? Because you will hear stand-up comedians come on stage even today and tell racist jokes and say things that are borderline inappropriate, or at least very, very crude, more so than any of these movies. So like humor strikes a different chord for people, and people really stick up for the fact that, you should be able to say and write these jokes because they're jokes. At the end of the day, they're not meant to insult, but it's a really, really blurry line sometimes with what you can and should be able to get away with these days.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well said. Well said.
But that's a fantastic entry, I think, for this list, and one that you and I will text quotes back and forth on every once in a while. Rest in peace, Tackleberry.
Yes.
It's a good movie.
It's funny. One of the things that strikes me about that movie, now that we're talking about it, that movie, and a lot of the movies kind of from that era have characters that really resonated with me and really kind of stuck with me. And I don't know if it's because I watch movies differently now than I did then. Like, I can't think of a movie in the last 10 years that has so many kind of ensemble characters that I know as well as I know the cast from Police Academy, right?
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
you've got Mahoney and Jones and Tackleberry and just like on and on, Hooks,
and
Hightower, yeah,
all
and
those guys.
and I guess maybe the Hangover movies, but I couldn't tell you those characters' names. I don't know, maybe they just don't make movies like that anymore, right? But it's
I don't think they do. I think it's too hard to pay those guys and retain them because, I mean, when you think about the cast of Police Academy and how many of them carried over from movie to movie, not every one of them made it every movie, but, Gutenberg was in, 3 or 4 of those movies. Hightower was in all of them. Tackleberry was in all of them. I think Lassard was in all of them until he died, maybe, or something along those lines. And Jones and, like a lot of those actors were kind of went along with the series, but it's really hard to do that these days because as soon as something is popular, you know, everybody wants a bigger cut of the
Yeah.
action, and then it just becomes more of a business at that point. So yeah,
I
that's a
suppose
really good point. I can't think of another movie series that had that large an ensemble that for the most part the core of it stuck together.
yeah, maybe like Fast and the Furious. Maybe.
Mm, that's a good point. Just from a casting perspective, yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. But those movies are making tons of
Right.
money.
Right.
So
Yeah.
those
I
guys
suppose.
are getting paid a lot of money. I don't
Right.
think you can say that Police Academy ever made a shit ton of
Oh
money. I
no.
think it
Yeah.
made good money, which is why more movies followed, but not
Yeah.
certainly not Fast and Furious. But
I suppose.
that's a good
Yeah.
call.
I suppose the only exception to that would be like the MCU, right? The Marvel universe. But again, that's a different beast altogether.
It is. That's sort of a
Yeah.
differently thought out thing.
Yeah.
But I love the idea that we have a podcast
Okay.
that is I love that we're
All right. What do you got?
I love that we're comparing Police Academy series to the Marvel saga. Like that to me is fantastic. That is something that no vlog has ever dared to do. So you heard it on
Probably
406 first. Um,
probably very true.
so my next one, if we're going to do 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, we go from one inappropriate Asian stereotype to another inappropriate Asian stereotype played by the same actor. Revenge of the Nerds is mine, which is, man, if you had to hold a gun in my head and tell me which one I liked more, Police Academy or Revenge of the Nerds, I'd probably just tell you to shoot me because I don't think I can make that kind of decision. Talk about one of the most hilariously quotable movies, and ironically, both of those movies came out the same year. They both came out in 1984. But that movie is, oh man, the epitome of sort of your 80s raunchy comedies, right? It had the nudity, it had the swearing, it didn't have any violence or anything like that, but I mean it was pretty over the top in all areas, including some pretty intense racial stereotypes.
A
And
lot of nerd persecution for sure.
yeah, nerd persecution. Well, see, though, that's actually really interesting because I started thinking about that. I'm like, I wonder if I mean, they could get away with it anyways because other movies were getting away with it. But Nerds almost gets a bit of a pass because the protagonists in this movie are nerds, right? They're in a sense their own minority, right? So if they're the own minority and they're sort of fighting back against the system, then some of that stereotype and some of that insensitivity, I feel like gets swept under the rug a little bit, or at least very cleverly hidden in some of it.
I would agree.
Except for the very inappropriate
yes.
nerd mouth rape scene at the end, or not towards the end. That's the one thing that you get that one you got to cut, right? Like that one is not okay. Never once in the history has anybody ever done that, and a girl been super psyched that that happened. Like we can't really perpetuate that stereotype with a clean conscience.
No, and so if you're not familiar with Revenge of the Nerds,
Pause
all, you
this
need to go
and go watch it.
Yeah,
right
go.
now.
Yeah, stop listening to our shit and go watch that movie. But there's a movie, or there's a scene at the end where the head nerd, Louis Skolnick, I believe his name was.
Indeed.
Had a super cool Darth Vader mask on, by the way, which is awesome. But the jock, his girlfriend, what was her name? Her name was, she was hot. Wasn't Penny, was it? Sally?
Might have been.
Anyways.
Yeah, sorry.
Anyways, they were in either a haunted house or a fun house or something like that. And she didn't know, she thought it was her boyfriend when it turns out it was the nerd. And they did things, and yeah, it was in retrospect, it was super rapey. And
it was flat out rapey. It wasn't even really rapey. It was rape. I mean, that's pretty much what it was.
Yeah.
Which is so not funny in any context.
Right. And so yeah, that movie you could probably make today, but yes, that scene, there's no way you make that scene even remotely close to the original cut.
Right. But Brian Tochi, I think is his name, was the Takashi in Revenge of the Nerds, and played oh man, I'm not gonna remember his name in Police Academy, but he's the connection between those two.
Yes, very good connection. Okay. Let's see. So, okay, I will go next with the movie that made me think of this list. Um, it's Ace Ventura: Pet Detective.
Oh wow.
And the
Not
reason, right? So the reason it's not the movie in and of itself is not. There's nothing wrong with it. The problem that the reason I don't think you would ever be able to make it today is it is incredibly insensitive to the trans community. The the character of Ray Finkel, who is kind of the bad guy, I guess, slash Lois Einhorn, is a trans woman, right? Or trans. Again, I don't want to. It's a guy that transitioned to a man. Guy that
transgender.
transitioned to a woman. Yes, yes. I just don't think, and I guess it's not even so much that the topic of trans, it's the way they deal with it. It's the fact that when they find out she was a man, that it's the way they deal with it. It's the fact that Dan Marino, who was an old Dolphins quarterback, had kissed her, and he starts throwing up, and Ace Ventura starts throwing up, and everybody's,
Right.
it's just the insensitive way in which they deal with that particular topic. I just don't see. And again, that is the main character, right? That's the entire kind of plot, or a huge plot point. Ace Ventura is looking for this particular person, and a huge part of the reason he can't find him is because he is a she.
Right.
And she has taken on a new identity. So yeah, that was actually the movie that made me think of this list to begin with.
That's interesting. That never crossed my mind, but I think that's a really good point, and it's not really something you can cut out because it's such a big part of the plot.
Yeah.
And it was a really big stretch too, because I remember watching that movie for the first time, like, wow, that was the jump I did not expect to see.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that they try to handle it comically, but it's
It's flat. That's one of the few jokes of that movie that actually does not
it
play
aged
very well, even
very
then.
poorly. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree. Well, that's interesting. So that kind of leads into some of my sort of, these movies aren't going to get made at all today. And the first one that I came up, or the first one on that list is 1986's Soul Man with C. Thomas Howell.
Oh,
If you remember that movie, most of you probably don't. Most of you probably don't remember Soul Man, and that's probably because A, it is easily the least entertaining and worst movie on this list. But B, it's about a kid, C. Thomas Howell, again, who is famous for movies like he was in E.T., he was in The Outsiders, he was in a lot of movies. A Sight Out for you volleyball fans.
what a great movie that is.
That's a pull right there, right?
Yes,
C. Thomas Howell's character in that movie is a kid who gets accepted to Harvard and then realizes how expensive it is to get into Harvard. So he applies for a loan under the guise that he is a black male. And in doing so, he has to go, I don't know if you can say blackface, because that's different, I think, but he essentially spray paints himself as an African American, goes to college, and plays most of that movie in disguise the entire time, and falls in love with a black woman. In this movie, it's Radon Chong, famous for her roles in Commando, and the daughter of Tommy Chong, famous Cheech and Chong. But I mean, it's just inappropriate all over. And then I'm watching this trailer, and I like, holy shit, I forgot James Earl Jones is in this movie.
Oh my God, he is, isn't
yes,
he?
like sort of like, in terms of black actors, like James Earl Jones is like, he's up there, man. I mean, he is. Yeah. He may not be Sidney Poitier, but I mean, he's crazy up there. And I'm like, wow, that seems pretty crazy that he was in that movie. But there's just no way you make that movie today, unless maybe you take it and you flip it somehow, because that would probably pass. But I mean, there's no way you remake that movie today and get any. You can't even sell that script, let alone get that movie filmed. That's just not going to happen.
Well, it's funny you say that, because the next movie on my list is a 2004 movie called White Chicks,
Uh,
and so
brother.
It was the Wayans brothers
Yep.
playing two white chicks.
Right.
And again, it's a good movie. Okay, it's an entertaining
Really?
movie. It's a
That's the first time I've heard anybody say that. I think you've had a little bit too much of that
yeah,
of that brown stuff there,
yeah.
sir.
It's a watchable movie. How about that? It's
All
watchable.
right. Yeah, I'll go with you on this one.
Okay, fine. There's two good scenes, but again, I don't know that, to your point, I don't know that a studio would look at the script for either of these movies in 2020 and take a chance on making, whether or not it's a good film or not. I don't know that they would take a chance. Again, this one is the Wayans brothers. They are FBI or police officers or what have you. They're going undercover, and they're playing two kind of super ditzy, if I remember correctly, like, the Hamptons, super rich white girls. They look nothing like them. The makeup that they wear is not remotely close to realistic. You just kind of watch this movie and you're like, how do the friends of these white gals not know that it's not them? But I suppose that's the joke. But yeah, it was. It's funny that you said I had totally forgotten about Soul Man, but you're right. Speaking of kind of blackface, is there? I mean, Robert Downey Jr. did blackface not too long ago, and I don't think
He
that
did
was
in
in Tropic Thunder, right? Yeah.
and there's a really interesting. I don't know if you listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, but obviously it's fantastic.
Yeah.
He interviews Robert Downey Jr. and he talks with him about that. I would recommend everybody check that out because that's really interesting. Because they have basically a very similar conversation. Like, could this be made today? Would anybody have the balls to make that today?
Yeah.
So I mean, it was kind of sort of blackface because but it was an actor doing blackface in a movie, right? Like, so
That's true. That's
it
true.
wasn't Robert Downey Jr. being a black man. It was Robert Downey Jr. being a white actor who was doing the blackface role for a movie within a movie. Like it's
Right.
very, like it's very Inception-y layered.
It's
Like,
very meta. Yeah.
yeah. So it's almost like they use that very cleverly to sort of get around the sensitivity of that. But I'm sure that there were still some people that were like,
Oh yeah.
that's just because they were poking fun at it while they were doing it doesn't necessarily make it appropriate.
Doesn't make well. And then when you think about, and I'm not even going to go into it, but when you think about some of the lines that character says,
Mm-hmm.
it makes it even worse. So they're playing on, yeah, they took some risks. How about that?
Right.
They took
Sure.
some risks.
They took some risks, and it paid
Yeah,
off pretty
it
well
did.
for them. Not enough to make
Yeah.
a sequel, but definitely
Right.
enough
Right.
to become a very, very prominent comedy.
Yeah.
So
All right.
my
What do you got?
last one is probably the other one that definitely could not be made, especially with the setup, the way that they did it. From 1982, one of my favorite directors, which made me a little bit sad, Richard Donner, famous for doing, movies like Superman and The Omen and Goonies, and he produced Lost Boys, and I'm like, just one of my absolute favorite directors of all time. The Toy with Richard Pryor.
Oh shit! You're right.
Which
I
is a
forgot about that.
movie about Richard Pryor, who is an out of work writer who goes in to apply for a job and essentially gets hired to be a glorified slave. And they basically hire him to come in and play with this kid and give him like $10,000 to do that kind of stuff. And his kid just basically, it was Jackie Gleason.
Yeah.
Jackie Gleason's kid, who is, I think his name is Scott Schwartz, more famously known as the kid who got his tongue stuck to the pole in the Christmas Story. That actor basically just beats the shit out of him for the entirety of the movie. And of course, there's a heartwarming message towards the end. but it's basically, they hire a black man to come in and play with a kid for an hour and a half. And it's, there's some jokes that are really funny and that land pretty well, but the premise of the movie, I just don't think is one they could possibly do these days without getting an enormous amount of trouble, or wouldn't even get off the ground.
Yeah, you're right. That's another movie that was again. The last time I watched that movie was probably maybe 1984.
Mhm.
Um, I enjoyed it immensely. Of course, I didn't even that premise and the whole reason that we're talking about it tonight never even crossed my mind back in 1984 or whenever the last time I watched it. But
Yeah, of course.
that was yeah. Okay, so I've got my last one. I think you could probably make it today, but it would require a shift of character. It's actually from the horror genre, and I don't remember what year it came out, but it's called Sleepaway Camp. So Sleepaway Camp, if you're not familiar, stars Felicia Rose, and it is about I think it was called Nightmare Vacation in the UK. Came out in '83. It was a slasher movie where kids go away to camp, they and they start dying, right? And so it's a very kind of regular trope of '80s slasher films. The twist of this one is the killer. Again, it's another trans thing, right? The guy is a girl is a guy, and it's a very graphic reveal. It's right at the very end, and it's one of those things that when you see this movie, it's actually a really, really well done, really well made twist. I just don't know that it holds up in 2020. In the landscape that we live in today, I just don't know that it would. I don't know how you would make it, but I don't know that it holds up today very well at all. Again, it's like there are several of these topics that we've talked about tonight that these movies were they were innovative, they were funny, they were horrific, and they just don't really and kind of thoughts and really and thoughts have changed around these topics, and people have grown, right? And something that maybe was a little offensive then is now really offensive, or maybe we didn't even understand why something was offensive back then, and now we do, right?
Yeah.
But I ran across that one relatively recently, and it had been a while since I'd seen it, and it was one of those. I think you used it. It was very cringeworthy, to see that reveal after so many years. I was like, that's not cool anymore. Again, not that not the fact, but the way it was dealt with, I guess, is
Sure.
similar to Ace Ventura.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. That's not one that's on my radar, so I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with that one.
Yeah, and I did have kind of one honorable mention, and it was Porky's. Porky's,
Right, right.
Porky's, Porky's was one of those movies that was just, I suppose you'd kind of put it in the coming of age kind of camp. I guess it was a precursor to American Pie, right? Kind of that type of
Yeah, yeah,
film.
absolutely. That's a great call.
You know,
Even a precursor to Revenge of the Nerds, if I remember right. Right? Like Nerds came out in '84. When did Porky's come out?
Porky's is probably 79, 80, something like that. Yeah, a couple years before. I think that was, if I remember correctly, I think that might have
81.
been a 81. Okay.
81. Yeah.
And so it was a lot of, there's a very famous scene. There's a shower where the guys are looking through a hole in the shower, and it's very kind of peeping Tom and creepy and that kind of thing. And there's just a lot of stuff that, again, just really doesn't hold up very well. Wasn't a great movie. There was a couple funny scenes in it, but just doesn't
Yeah.
really doesn't hold up all that well over the years.
That's funny you should mention that, because I just sort of remember that, like, when I was a kid, like, I thought that was the closest thing to pornography that there was, right?
Right.
Like mainstream pornography, like Porky's was just nothing but like boobs, right? And that's
Right.
the way my parents would let me within a mile of that movie. So that's pretty funny, and by these standards, it can probably air at TBS after like 9 o'clock on a Saturday night or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
But I mean, it
You
did
know
have
what?
some nudity and some pretty. I don't think I'd call it graphic, but I'd definitely say some very mature adult scenes there. But
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. So
and it,
yeah, it's funny. I don't know if I'm not watching as many. Actually, I take that back. I'm not watching as many movies as I did when I was growing up, for sure. But
of course,
it's funny. Like you think about movies like a Police Academy or Ace Ventura. And again, I don't see those types of movies really being made today. And it's not even about. I don't know if is it that type of comedy that doesn't sell. Is it that type of? Is it that a studio doesn't want to take a risk? I'm not sure what it is. But like you really again, The Hangover is probably the closest thing to that movie that I can remember um, in the last several years. And then you've got The Bridesmaids and those kind of things. Um, Maybe Wedding Crashers, right? But I mean, you really don't have. I don't know that'd be a good list to have, like comedies that we like from the last, recent comedies from the
modern
last.
comedy. So like the
Yeah,
Judd Apatow movies, like 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up, some of the Seth Rogen stuff, some of the Danny McBride, that kind of stuff. Like there's
yeah.
some stuff out there. There's some hidden gems, but it's definitely different now, and I can't quite put my finger on why, but it doesn't feel like it's the same as when we were growing up, for sure.
It doesn't. And again, I don't know if that's just that I'm looking at it through a lens of a mid 40s adult or a parent,
Probably.
or probably both, probably a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I find it interesting. We go back and when we look at movies that we want to watch with our kids, and so I have a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 6-year-old, and to try to find a movie even for the 14 and 12-year-olds that you know you and I grew up watching regularly, like a hell, even like a Goonies or a Die Hard or those kind of things. To go back and watch those movies now, it's amazing what passed for PG and PG-13 that really wouldn't even be remotely close now. Even a movie like Ghostbusters, which is in my mind one of the all-time greatest
My favorite comedy of
movies,
all time.
right?
Easy.
You go back and you watch that movie now, it's full of language and all kinds of stuff that, again, as a parent, I don't know that I would let my I mean, a 14-year-old, yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
My 12-year-old, my 6-year-old, no, probably not, right? It's just interesting, and I remember watching those movies for as long as I can remember watching movies, right? So
Well, it's
it's
interesting
just
because you have to also consider that, like, it wasn't until so you mentioned Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters came out in 83 or 84.
I think 84,
I think
yeah, and
84,
so
right? So 84 was the year that PG-13 got introduced,
that's true.
and
That was
it got
Temple of Doom, right?
introduced because, well, Temple of Doom wasn't the first PG-13 movie. It was the movie that caused the PG-13 rating because it was pretty extreme.
Okay.
The first, you'll appreciate this, the first PG-13 movie ever was Red Dawn.
Oh, nice. Okay,
Patrick Swayze. Yeah.
nice. Okay,
So that
and C. Thomas Howell.
and C.
And C.
Thomas Howell, and wow, shit all comes back together. That's amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah. So like back in the day, like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, I believe was PG, and there's at least one F-bomb in that movie, and
there is.
the standards have sort of changed over the years, so things
Yeah.
are much different now. But yeah, I'm the same way.
Jaws.
Like I'm trying to find movies in my childhood that I would want my kids to watch, and
Yeah.
there are a couple of them that definitely don't fit. I think if you
Yeah.
go with the world of Spielberg, you're going to be in good shape because those were mostly PG and very family friendly, and
Yeah.
you know, you're in good shape
But
there.
but Jaws was rated PG though too. So
Yeah, was Jaws PG? No, I gotta
Yeah,
look
it
that
was.
up. I didn't think
Yeah,
that was.
I'm
Oh
pretty sure it
God, you're
was.
right. Well, that was 1975 though. Which, by the
Yeah,
way, if I'm making an honorable mention for movies that can't get made today, Jaws is probably one of those movies because, I
that's
mean,
fair.
for, anybody who, I won't ramble on too long, but anybody who wants to get to know me is going to know that Jaws is my absolute number one top favorite movie of all time. And one of the greatest things about Jaws is the entire uh, ethos around how that movie got started, like the filmmaking of that movie, and the many times that the production of that movie almost got shut down because that's the first movie they ever tried to actually film in the ocean with all the salt water and all that stuff. And the fact that today that movie would just either get completely scrapped or they'd say we're just going to CGI the whole thing and call it Deep Blue Sea or whatever. But back then it was an absolute marvel of filmmaking, and the fact that they were able to pull it off is amazing. So that would be my honorable mention now that you bring that up, because there's no way you could make that movie. There's no way studios would have the kind of patience for anybody. And Spielberg at the time was not an established director. That was the
No,
movie that made him. He had done stuff before that, but he was not made before that. So that was his trial for sure. So
yeah.
anyways.
So, all right. Well, we did some good work here this evening, sir. We got some good throwback movies to go back and maybe see if you can't find them again. You might have a hard time finding them on TV these days.
Some of
But
them
I
may
bet
be
you can find them.
streaming on YouTube, and the studios don't even care anymore. Like they're just there's a movie called My Science Project that I used to love when I was a kid, and I can't. That movie is not distributed anywhere, but you can watch it on YouTube. There's an hour and a half video of it, and not YouTube TV. You could just search YouTube and watch the movie.
And
Someone
it's
just
there.
like held a camcorder up to a DVR and or DVD, and you can watch the movie. So some of these probably you can find there.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, hey, next time the topic is on you, sir, and we will we'll have to make sure that that we get to it sooner rather than later.
We will. I guarantee it.
All right. So, hey, everybody out there, if you like us, leave us a comment, ask us a question, and we'll talk to you later.
All right. Love you, brother. Take care.
Love you too, man. See ya. Bye.
Yeah.